Bye-bye. Let's unpack this. Today, we're taking a deep dive into some incredibly raw and insightful excerpts from the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things.
By Ben Horowitz.
Right. Horowitz is, a name pretty much synonymous with navigating the absolute worst-case scenarios in tech.
He led companies like LoudCloud and Opsware through storms that, frankly, sank many others.
And this book, it's really not a playbook for when things are easy, is it?
No, not at all. It's more like a visceral account of leading when everything is just completely on fire.
Exactly. It's an unflinching look at what he calls the struggle.
The struggle. It pulls back the curtain on the brutal, often hidden reality of being a CEO when things are going, well, spectacularly wrong.
Those moments that genuinely test your limits, personally, professionally, everything.
Right.
And our mission here, for you listening, is really to extract the most critical nuggets of wisdom from his hard-won experiences.
We want to give you kind of a shortcut, maybe, to understanding how leaders navigate that immense pressure.
Yeah, how they make those truly gut-wrenching decisions nobody else can, and how they simply survive when facing what feels like a company near-death scenario.
There are some profound lessons here, really, for anyone trying to build or lead something important. Doesn't matter the scale, I think.
No, it's about resilience, tenacity, making impossible choices. So let's start with that core concept he defines, the struggle. What is it, really?
Well, he describes the struggle as this relentless, deeply lonely fight for survival that, founders and leaders inevitably face.
It's that period where nothing seems to work.
Exactly. The weight of responsibility is crushing. You feel like you're constantly dodging bullets. And he really emphasizes this isn't some rare thing.
Right. He mentions even giants like Steve Jobs, Mark Zuckerberg. They went through their own versions.
Absolutely. And he doesn't sugarcoat the emotional toll, the psychological impact.
No kidding. He shares that infamous, really blunt email from Mark Andreessen at Netscape. Just 2 words, right? Fuck you, Mark.
Yeah. Gives you a sense of the raw intensity, the pressure cooker they were in.
Or think about that grueling 3-week roadshow trying to raise money for LoudCloud after the bubble burst.
Oh, man. Facing investors who were just hostile. Asking things like, why are you even here? Do you have any idea what's going on?
He barely slept the whole trip, he says. The sheer exhaustion, the mental strain, you can feel it in his writing.
That feeling of profound isolation really stands out too, doesn't it?
It does, when you're facing those huge questions about whether your company will even survive.
Right, and the gap between your messy, detailed reality and what any advisor outside can possibly grasp, it's huge.
Horowitz's blunt phrase, "you are all alone," just perfectly captures that burden.
Yeah, and he uses that incredibly vivid, almost morbid story. The young doctor and the older one looking at a patient who was technically dead, but didn't know it yet. Still moving. He related that feeling to the look in Bill Campbell's eyes when they discussed a contingency plan, basically shutting down the cloud business.
It's like they were looking at their own company, dead but still walking, chilling.
It really is.
Yes.
And the emotional impact, it lingers, right? Long after the crisis is technically over.
Yeah, even after Opsware was sold to HP for that huge amount, objectively a massive success.
He describes feeling physically ill, cold sweats, throwing up, crying.
Even though he knew, logically, it was the right decision, the smart move.
But that emotional connection to what he'd built over 8 years of struggle, it was still agonizing.
What Horowitz shows you, I think, is that success isn't some clean upward path. It's often just a messy, painful battle.
Definitely. And while the scale of his stories might be different for most of us, those feelings, isolation, pressure, doubt, exhaustion,
they resonate deeply. If you're responsible for something important and things go sideways, you feel that. It's universal.
Okay, so let's pivot a bit. Another area where the struggle gets intensely personal and difficult.
Yeah.
Navigating the human element.
Yes. The tough personnel decisions you have to make when times are hard.
These are just unavoidable, especially in downturns, and often, honestly, the most painful part of the job.
Horowitz is incredibly direct about layoffs, isn't he?
Very. He insists they must be done personally, ideally by the direct manager or the CEO if necessary.
And his why is so important.
Absolutely crucial. People will remember that day forever, every single detail, how they were treated.
And how you treat those leaving, it impacts everyone who stays. Their trust, their morale.
Exactly. Leaving employees with dignity, fairness. It's not just compassionate. It's essential for the health of the organization that survives.
He also tackles that incredibly awkward, really painful scenario, demoting a loyal friend.
Oh, yeah. Happens all the time in startups, right?
Yeah.
You hire someone early on, maybe based on trust or potential,
But the company grows, the role gets way more complex.
and they just don't have that deep, specialized experience you suddenly need. You have to bring in someone who does.
That sounds like one of the hardest conversations imaginable. How does he say you should approach it? Fairly, honestly.
Clarity is key. Be definitive. He says use phrases like, I have decided. No ambiguity.
So they don't think it's a negotiation. Or they can lobby to keep the job.
Precisely. The decision is made. And then be honest about the why. Acknowledge the reality. The role needs more experience in this specific function.
He even suggests maybe admitting your own limitations as a leader. Like you can't develop them into that role.
Yeah, if that's true. But that honesty about the role has to be coupled with explicit appreciation for their past contributions. Value what they did do.
Okay. And what if you genuinely want them to stay, just in a different capacity?
You have to make that explicit immediately. Talk about other roles, career development, how you see their future there.
He suggests something interesting, too. Maybe a compensation increase with the demotion.
It sounds counterintuitive, right? But it's a tangible signal. It shows you value them as a person and want them to stay, even if that specific job outgrew them. Powerful stuff.
Really powerful. Those are incredibly tough, but necessary conversations. Okay, flipping to the other side. Hiring executives. Another high-stakes human decision.
Huge stakes. How does Horowitz recommend evaluating candidates for those key roles?
Well, he outlines several criteria beyond just experience on paper.
Right. World-class functional expertise. Are they truly top tier in their domain? Operational excellence. Can they actually run the function efficiently?
Strategic contribution. Are they smart enough to help shape the company's overall direction?
And effectiveness as a team member, which isn't necessarily about being universally liked.
No, it's about being constructive, effective within the exec team. He notes the importance varies by role, but you need strength across most areas.
And the process for figuring this out.
Develop specific, targeted questions to really probe those criteria. Assemble a strong, diverse interview team.
But the CEO must do the reference checks personally. That's key.
Yes, both the front door ones the candidate gives you and backdoor checks. People who know them but aren't on the official list.
And you're not just checking for, like, is this person nice?
Yeah.
You're checking specific fits against your criteria.
That Mark Cranny example, hiring him as head of sales, is such a great illustration.
Yeah, Horowitz describes him bristling at the standard get-to-know-you questions.
But he lit up when talking about how his previous companies won deals, not how he won them.
Yes, that was the key insight. It showed his focus wasn't personal glory. It was collective company success.
Plus, deep understanding of competition, that huge network, the sales FBI thing.
Right. That focus on how the company wins was the critical trait he uncovered through that process.
Okay, let's shift from people decisions to shaping the organization's soul, the culture, especially when things are tough. Horowitz really emphasizes transparency, telling it like it is.
Oh, he's a huge believer. And the benefits, even when the truth is ugly, are significant.
Like building trust, right. Employees know they aren't being spun.
Exactly. And it gets more brains focused on solving the real problems. Plus, it speeds up identifying and fixing issues because people aren't afraid to raise them.
That story about the all-engineering meeting, being totally transparent about Blade Logic kicking their asses, that's powerful.
Yeah, telling them they were getting our asses kicked and had one bullet left in the gun.
You'd think that level of brutal honesty might just crush morale.
That's what you might think. But Horowitz later read something an employee wrote about it.
And realized the team wasn't crushed.
No, they were galvanized. They felt he'd done a great job telling them exactly how it was, giving them feedback on the real situation. They were ready for the challenge because they knew the stakes.
Interesting. He also touches on managing performance and metrics. Mentions that notorious hockey stick revenue pattern.
Yeah, that classic startup curve, flat forever, then supposedly shoots straight up. Makes planning almost impossible.
And he strongly cautions against managing only by the numbers.
Calls it painting by numbers, strictly for amateurs. He uses that HP example, sacrificing long-term R&D for short-term earnings.
You have to include qualitative goals, too. Track those alongside the quantitative ones.
Absolutely. And he briefly notes, even with best efforts, employees can misinterpret managers' intent sometimes. Transparency helps bridge that.
Okay, so culture itself. How does he define it? It's not just free snacks and ping pong tables, right?
Definitely not. He defines company culture as a tangible way of working. It's the actual set of practices that distinguish your company.
How you operate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And its purpose is to distinguish you, preserve critical operating values like customer focus, and help identify employees who are genuinely a good fit for your mission and how you do things.
He gives some incredibly memorable, almost brutal examples of how culture gets reinforced through actions.
The Andreessen Horowitz $10 per minute fine for being late to meetings with entrepreneurs, that must be a shock for new hires.
Right. But that rule, it seems harsh, but it's like a cultural shock tactic.
It instantly imprints a core value. Founders are paramount. Their time is sacred. It's a brutal but unforgettable distillation of the firm's operating principle.
And the contrasting approaches to titles are interesting too.
Yeah, Mark Andreessen seeing them as the cheapest perk for recognition versus Mark Zuckerberg using deliberately low titles at Facebook.
Trying to reduce internal politics, keep engineering and products central.
Right. Different methods, but both are strategic uses of titles to shape the culture they wanted.
And crucial for keeping things healthy, especially under pressure, dealing with destructive employee types.
Yes, he identifies several who actively harm the workplace. The heretic smart, but works against the company, framing every fault as proof it's hopeless.
The flake, unreliable due to underlying issues, which just kills team trust.
And the jerk, someone whose behavior is consistently destructive, creating toxicity, not just occasionally blunt.
He argues you can't just ignore these. They actively undermine the company's ability to function.
Yeah, they have to be addressed for the health of the whole organization.
Okay, let's talk about surviving those truly existential crises he faced. That transition from LoudCloud to Opsware, it was just a desperate fight for survival, wasn't it? Filled with near-death moments.
It really was. Started with that gut-wrenching collapse of the LoudCloud stock price after the IPO, down to 35 cents a share.
Which was below their cash value. Wow.
Facing potential death, he took the remaining 80 employees off-site to a low-end motel in Santa Cruz, of all places.
And he was just completely honest with them.
Laid out the brutal reality. Asked them to commit or quit right there, that day. He needed to know who was truly in the fight with him.
And only 2 people quit.
Only 2. That level of loyalty, that willingness to face the fire alongside him, it's remarkable.
It really shows the power of honesty and, I guess, shared purpose.
Definitely. So they pivoted to Opsware, the software business, but the crises weren't over. Then came the massive EDS crisis.
Where one huge customer was like 90% of their revenue and threatened to cancel.
Exactly. He describes the stakes in just blunt terms, must win, because we're fucked if they lose this one customer.
The intensity must have been incredible. Daily meetings just focused on fixing things for this one client.
Right. And the breakthrough moment, he explains, wasn't just fixing the immediate problems. It was finding exciting value for EDS.
How did they do that?
They discovered EDS used this asset management system called Tangram. And Opsware could uniquely integrate with it, something no other vendor could do.
So the pivotal move was actually acquiring Tangram. Save the account and basically the company?
Exactly. But even after that crisis was resolved, boom, another threat pops up almost immediately. Blade Logic.
The competitor that started eating their lunch. They started losing deals. Stock dropped again, down to $2.90.
Another really tough all-hands meeting, asking a team that was already exhausted for maximum sustained effort again.
He reflected later on how hard that was, asking people to give even more when they were already running on fumes.
Yeah, and the culmination of this incredibly turbulent, 8-year journey was eventually selling Opsware to HP.
For $1.65 billion, 14.225 vouchers a share. A huge outcome.
But it wasn't a smooth ride at all to get there. It shows that full, arduous cycle. Building something, seeing it nearly evaporate, that $1.35 stock price.
And then spending years just fighting tooth and nail to rebuild it into something significant.
Exactly. So pulling back from all these intense stories, what are the key lessons Horowitz offers for anyone navigating hardship, professional or otherwise?
He offers several really potent ones, I think. First, you won't have all the answers. That's okay. But you absolutely must make a decision.
Right. He captures that CEO dilemma starkly.
Yeah.
If you don't like choosing between horrible and cataclysmic, don't become CEO.
Don't freeze up just because all the options suck. Paralysis is fatal.
Exactly. Second big one. You don't have to shoulder every single burden alone, even though it feels like you do.
Share every burden that you can.
Get the maximum number of brains focused on the problems. Like telling the whole company about Blade Logic, it wasn't just complaining.
It was enlisting the entire team's intelligence to solve a shared existential threat.
Right. He also makes it clear that building a tech company, or really any complex organization, not checkers, this is motherfucking chess.
Meaning it's incredibly complex, dynamic, requires deep strategic thinking, not just simple moves.
And he challenges that conventional wisdom around accountability. The accountability versus creativity paradox, he calls it.
If you punish failed risk just because they failed, even if they were good risks taken with maximum effort,
people will just stop taking risks. You have to evaluate the quality of the risk assessment, the quality of the effort, not just the outcome, if you actually want innovation.
That makes sense.
Huh.
And he stresses continuous learning as a leader, particularly in that ability to achieve the vision attribute.
Yeah. Never be so confident you stop improving your own skills.
Finally, he just hammers on the importance of effective feedback. His principles here are invaluable.
Be authentic. Make sure it comes from a place of wanting them to succeed. Don't make it personal.
Never embarrass someone in front of their peers. Tailor your style to the individual. Be direct, but not mean.
Because watered down, indirect feedback, it's just confusing, ultimately unhelpful. Be clear, even if it's uncomfortable for you.
Precisely. And consistent, direct feedback delivered well, it has huge positive outcomes, right?
Yeah, people get used to receiving it. They focus on the issues. Bad news travels faster internally, making the whole company more adaptable, quicker to react.
So this deep dive into Ben Horowitz's The Hard Thing about hard things, it really reveals that building something great isn't about avoiding problems or finding easy answers.
No, it's about confronting the struggle, that relentless, often soul-crushing reality of leadership head on.
And these raw stories, these hard-won lessons, they provide a pretty potent framework for anyone confronting their own difficult challenges.
They remind you that hardship isn't necessarily a sign of failure. It's often just part of the journey.
Survival and eventual success, it comes from resilience, making those incredibly tough, honest decisions, keeping that transparency.
And relentlessly focusing on what truly matters for the organization's survival and mission.
It really makes you consider, doesn't it, how maybe the willingness to endure immense difficulty, to just keep pushing when everything tells you to quit.
Maybe that is the true distinguishing factor in achieving something extraordinary.
Yep.
Is that ability to tolerate the struggle. What separates those who build something lasting?
It's a provocative thought. And, these excerpts we've touched on are really just the tip of the iceberg.
Oh, yeah. The book goes into way more granular detail, specific, actionable advice for a whole range of operational challenges leaders face day to day.
Definitely plenty more hard-won wisdom waiting to be explored in those pages.